Hello mech warriors, and welcome back to the Mech Lab, where we try to be a better mech commander every day. Today we're talking about the CGL proposed rules changes, package number 3, Gear, which goes over changes to the weapons and equipment that make mechs so very deadly. I will be referring to my first video on these playtest changes in a number of places, so go and watch that if you haven't seen it already, but I'll give a rough summary of what I'm referring to in the video. And before we start, I just want to say that a lot of these changes are kind of insane, and CGL's refusal to release battle value changes along with any of these makes it very hard for me to say whether or not I actually like these changes, because really it's going to come down to the battle value alterations that they make to things like Clanlord's pulse lasers and even autocannons and ammo, because now that ammo is significantly less deadly, should we change the battle value discount you get for uncased ammo? I'm not 100% sure on that, but let's get into these changes. First of all, they are standardizing the explosive component damage. So this means Gauss rifles and improved heavy lasers. I can't think of any other weapons that this affects, but now it's twice the crit slots of the weapon. An improved heavy large laser would take 6 damage because it has 3 crit slots, down from 8, and an improved heavy medium laser now takes 4 damage, up from 3 because of its 2 crits. I think that standardizing this is a good idea. It just makes it a lot less confusing. Again, we're trying to increase the speed of play, make things easier to remember, make things more accessible to new players. And while some of the changes that they've done in the name of that have been misguided in my opinion, this one is not. I think that this is fine. Anti-missile system change is really cool because previously an AMS was basically just a liability. Once in a while you'd get shot by missiles and it would reduce the damage a bit, but a lot of the time you would be carrying around 12 rounds of ammunition that you couldn't get rid of that would explode if it got crit. But now that we have standardized ammo damage, even a mech without case is only going to take 20, and as standard you can engage up to 2 flights of missiles per turn. So that archer that fires 2 LRM-15s at you, now you can actually reduce damage from both of those, and all AMS can reduce a missile's attack cluster size to 0. So if you're not aware, AMS reduces the cluster roll by 4. So on average you're reducing missile damage from a result of 7 to a result of 3, but if they roll a 4, then you can reduce it to 0 now. Laser AMS was the only one that could do this previously, and it says all AMS systems, which means that mechs with multiple AMS, such as the Komodo and the Kitfox, can now engage up to 4 flights of missiles that are coming at them. Of course, autocannons are getting huge buffs in this playtest, so we might actually see a lot less missiles in play, so I don't know how good this is really going to be. But at least now you can get rid of 2 shots per round and get that ammo out of your system much quicker so that it doesn't explode. Now we've got armor changes, so anti-penetrative ablative, basically this was really good against tandem ammo and armor-piercing ammo, as well as a couple of the physical weapons. We'll get to these in a moment, but this is actually a little bit more necessary now that certain things, such as armor-piercing ammo, are much improved. Previously, ABA wasn't that big of a deal because usually people banned tandem ammo and armor-piercing autocannons weren't very good. The fact that it now negates all through armor criticals as well as negates the more powerful armor-piercing weapons is pretty significant. This isn't on many mechs, but for the ones that do have it, it is a lot better, as I think it probably should be. Ferrolamellar is getting a pretty significant change. It no longer negates armor-piercing ammo, which is pretty significant. Like I said, armor-piercing ammo is getting a buff in this patch. Ferrolamellar basically reduces damage by 1 per 5 points of damage that it deals, I believe, and that's pretty much all it's going to do now, although this doesn't specify tandem warheads, so maybe it's still effective against tandem charges. Anyways, Ferrolamellar is pretty rare as well, but the mechs that have it are definitely played in competitive. They are very tanky and hard to bring down. They're especially tough against LBX cluster ammunition, for example, or SRM spam. I don't know if this is really needed, honestly. Heat dissipating now reduces damage from heat-causing weapons, such as flamers, and plasma, I guess, as well, so that is pretty significant. And you can stand and fire without any ill effects now, which is kind of cool. Again, rare armor type, probably not that relevant to competitive play, but I suppose it could be relevant. I've never seen a mech with heat dissipating armor taken in a tournament. Maybe that'll change now. Impact resistant armor is very good against melee attacks, and that's pretty much it. It also used to be good against AP weapons, but now it is not. So a lot of armor types that were good against AP weapons are getting nerfed, and AP weapons themselves are getting buffed. So that's a pretty significant change. I guess since we're talking so much about the AP ammo, we should just talk about it. So AP ammo is now going to be times 0.6. So notably for an AC-20, this is 3 ammo instead of 2, but an AC-5 is going to have 12 shots, which is plentiful for most Battletech games. So what this stuff does is you're treated as having a through armor critical every single time you are hit by an AP shell, but it's modified by the size of the cannon. So AC-2s, 4s, and 5s all have a -2 modifier. So what that means is now you need a 10 to crit. It used to be you needed an 11 to crit with the smaller autocannons. So that is a pretty significant increase. And now Proto Mech Autocannon 8s, AC-10s, and AC-20s are all a -1 modifier. So that means instead of an 8, they only need a 9. So AC-10s and Pack 8s specifically are getting a big buff from this. With an AC-20, you're going to strip most of the armor off a location anyways, but especially the Pack 8, which is largely useless, is pretty good now. And there's a couple of units that spam Protomech Autocannon 2s and AC-2s, which will see a very big increase in power from this. But the most significant change is that it used to be 1 harder to hit when you were using AP ammo. So if you needed a 4 to hit previously because you have a 4 gunnery skill, now you would need a 5 hit, but they're removing that penalty. So AP ammo is just as accurate as normal ammo. This is really powerful because AP ammo now has a chance to just cripple an enemy mech anytime you shoot someone, which is kind of broken, and it's gonna make it almost as good as tandem charges for SRMs. Now, tandem charges are still better because you hit with so many of them, but mechs carrying like AC-2s and AC-5s are gonna be a lot more powerful with this change, especially with them changing all of these armor types so that they now no longer negate these effects or give a bonus against them. So is it gonna be game-breaking? We'll have to find out. Smaller autocannons generally were pretty bad before. Now they might actually be kind of useful. Now, laser reflective armor, still probably pretty bad, but now you take less heat damage from heat weapons, which is pretty good, so plasma isn't as dangerous against you, for example. And then reactive armor is also not going to negate the effects of AP ammunition. I feel like they're reacting to AP ammunition being pretty bad before in maybe too extreme of a way, because they're making the counters to AP just go away for the most part while making it stronger. So stacking that with additional benefits to autocannons is also kind of a crazy decision. So let's just go over this. So all autocannons are now much more resilient against criticals. It used to be if you got hit with a single crit on your AC-20, suddenly the weapon's disabled. That was pretty bad. But now, the first critical hit applied to any autocannon does not destroy the autocannon. So you can take 2 crits on a base AC-20, AC-5, etc. And if there is a single slot, so AC-2 for example, 2 hits to the slot are required to disable it. So that's a pretty big change. They're more resilient to criticals. I do actually like this quite a bit. Again, lasers were far superior to autocannons before. Doing some things to make autocannons a little bit more in line with the power of lasers and doing it in a flavorful way is actually, I think, a great idea. I don't know if making missiles worse and making autocannons better at the same time is necessarily great, because now LRMs are going to be kind of outclassed by autocannons for the first time in Battletech history. Rotary autocannons are now able to make an unjam check while firing their weapons, which is very significant. Previously, you pretty much had to disable your mech entirely to try to get the autocannon unjammed. So I like that they're making rotary autocannons a little bit better. They were already pretty reasonably good, but this change makes them extremely viable, I would say. Also, you can now take caseless ammo, which increases the amount of ammo that you can have, but you can't clear caseless ammo jams, which is, I would say, a good trade-off. If you want to be going taka 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 just all game and blasting enemies with your rotary autocannons, when you roll that 2 on the dice, you can't really blame anyone but yourself. And then ultra autocannons can no longer jam. This is maybe a bit of an over-tuning. I think that they probably should jam. What I would actually do with ultra autocannons is, because the 2 cluster roll is so bad, I would make ultra autocannons fire twice. You make 2 attack rolls. That is going to make things take a little bit longer when rolling the dice, but now instead of rolling a location check, you just roll 2 to hit checks. So it's pretty much actually going to be about the same, and it makes ultra autocannons a lot more consistent, but it also makes them more likely to jam. But now we give them the ability to unjam their weapons. So I think overall, this is maybe a little bit too good, but again, we'll have to see. I do like the changes to rotaries. I'm not sure about the Ultra Autocannon. Before we talk about C3, we have to talk about ECM. So ECM is a field of jamming that your mech puts out in a 6-hex bubble around you. And previously, if anything passed through here, it would have its electronics negated. So if you were firing at a mech with Artemis missiles, and your Artemis missiles passed through the ECM field, they would lose their Artemis cluster bonus. Now, the ECM bubble has to be on the mech that is firing the missiles. So this is a nerf to ECM, which is interesting, and it also makes it easier to play on the table because it can be annoying to remember where the enemy's ECM field is. In Megamech, obviously it's a lot easier because the bubble is shown, but for tabletop players, I think that this might be a good change. Of course, it does change how E-War works overall, which is a whole kettle of fish. But let's just look at C3 specifically for now. So this is basically just saying C3 is too easily countered. So previously, if your C3 network, the link between two mechs, crossed through an ECM field, it would be negated. You could no longer connect to the C3 master with the C3 unit on the scouter mech. But now, because of this change, you have to be within 6 hexes of one of them. And on top of that, C3 only degrades the connection. It doesn't actually completely nullify it. So a mech that would normally have its range modifier reduced by 4, instead only has it reduced by 2, but the degradation of the to-hit modifier that you can get from the C3 can now only be halved. It can't be negated entirely, so this makes C3 a lot stronger. However, they have altered the BV calculation as well. If an active C3 network can be formed by the force, any unit intended to be part of that network multiplies its battle value by 1.3. If such a unit has boosted C3, it's 1.35 instead, based on the assumption of usually being able to generate 1 to 2 point TN improvement. Notably, a fixed 2-point gunnery improvement is 1.4 times BV cost. So this makes the battle value of the unit a little bit higher than if you had just linked 2 units together, but it makes it a lot cheaper if you're linking a whole bunch of people into a C3 network. Typically, it's going to be about 4 units that you can fit on a single master. So overall, this makes C3 a lot more viable, but it makes the buy-in initially a lot more expensive, but makes large networks a lot cheaper. And I think that that's a good change overall. C3 used to pretty much not really be taken in competitive Battletech just because it was so darn expensive. Now you can link together a whole bunch of units for reasonably cheap. I mean, honestly, if it was me, I would probably just take units that don't have C3 and improve their gunnery by 1. It's gonna have largely the same effect, but if you play it well, you can get a -4 to your gunnery on a sniper unit, which might be devastatingly powerful. I don't know. I don't play with C3 very much. I do like that it can't be used with stealth armor units. Stealth armor units have to have ECM active in order to have stealth armor active, so that makes sense. And also, they made it so that C3 units need to be able to see the target in order to feed targeting information. So I think overall, the C3 and ECM changes are pretty reasonable, considering that missiles have been nerfed indirectly by buffing AMS and also by having autocannons get better. ECM being nerfed makes Artemis missiles a lot stronger, which is definitely a big improvement for them because Artemis previously was pretty bad. Heavy duty gyro. Keep in mind that gyro crits are only causing a 2 penalty to PSRs instead of a 3 penalty. So now heavy duty gyros instead apply a +1 modifier to all PSRs, but unlike damage to other gyros, no PSR is forced because of a gyro crit. And then also, if you have a heavy duty gyro, you cannot be immobilized by just 2 crits. Instead, you need to deal all 4 crits to the gyro before this mech is put in the dirt. So hooray for heavy duty gyro, it's a lot better now. I don't think it's going to have a significant effect. This is a very uncommon piece of equipment. Missiles! Advanced tactical missiles no longer hit in clusters of 5, but now hit in clusters of 6. So they're better at dealing damage to a single location. They are worse at dealing multiple clusters in order to crit seek. I don't see that this is going to be a particularly large difference. I think if we're trying to keep things easier to remember, that we should just keep it 5, and then all missiles either hit in 5s if they are not SRMs, or 2s if they are SRMs. MRMs. But notably, because ECM is nerfed, ATMs are a lot better now because they have built-in Artemis 4. Extended range LRMs. These are probably the worst weapon in the game currently. I honestly am not even going to bother looking this up because these are so uncommon that I still don't think anyone's going to take them. However, medium range missiles are now insanely good. Eliminate the +1 target number penalty but apply a -1 cluster hit table penalty. Note that if this change is accepted, Apollo FCS would then have to be reworked, but such a redesign will await the results of this test. MRMs are largely useless. Nobody takes them. They're basically worse SRMs. They don't hit with lots of crit seeking like SRMs do, and only have slightly better range overall than SRMs. Now, one thing about MRMs is that since they're a DCMS weapon, a lot of DCMS mechs that have C3 also use MRMs. So buffing MRMs in combination with buffing C3 is a very significant buff to DCMS as a whole, and I think that both changes in combination will make MRMs potentially too powerful, which is a crazy thought. Obviously, now that it doesn't have a hit penalty, the battle value on these is going to have to go up a bit, and I'm okay with the -1 cluster hit stable penalty because it is flavorful. They're dummy fire missiles. It makes sense. And then I guess Apollo FCS is just probably going to do the exact same thing that Artemis does, except Apollo FCS will not be stopped by ECM because it currently isn't, but I would imagine that with the changes to ECM, they probably make it so that Apollo missiles are jammed by ECM. So essentially, Apollo missiles for MRMs are going to now have a +1 to their cluster hits table instead of a -1. And I think that that would be a pretty good change. Overall, I mean, MRMs plus C3 network probably going to be a new thing that people can mess around with because they have a maximum range of 15. So they can hit you from pretty much beyond LRM effective range if you have a C3 spotter near to the enemy very accurately and with much more throw weight than LRMs. Another buff to missiles. Narc is getting a significant change. INARC pods can no longer be brushed off, which is actually a nerf in my opinion because the vast majority of the time people would just punch themselves in the face trying to brush the Narc off, which was hilarious. And when I was using INARC in a tournament, I had that happen about 3 or 4 times. Every single time the person realized, oh, I'm just going to punch myself if I try to do this, so I'm going to stop. Nobody ever successfully removes the Narc pod, but you should definitely let them try. Anyways, so a regular Narc basically is now treated the same as INARC. In addition to the +2 cluster hit table that it used to get, it's now going to also get a -1 TN to attacks. So a bonus to cluster and a bonus to hit. And in addition to that, you no longer need a spotter for indirect fire. Now, this last paragraph is a little bit confusing, but I will clarify what it means. Narc pods provide none of the benefits while in the area of an active enemy ECM. However, these benefits are not lost if the mech that fired the pod itself is in the radius of enemy ECM. What this means is that the ECM field needs to be covering the mech that has a Narc pod attached to it. If it is not covering the mech that has a Narc pod attached to it, all of the benefits are still in play, even if your ECM field is on the mech that is firing the missiles that are benefiting from the Narc pod. So essentially think of it like this. Enemy mech with ECM is standing on top of your archer. Your archer fires its LRMs. They arc up and out of the ECM field and then obtain their target lock and get -1 to their hit roll and +2 to the cluster roll when hitting the enemy mech. This is a massive change and a huge improvement to a once much derided piece of equipment. So now essentially the regular Narc launcher is a great piece of missile buffing equipment, and the INARC launcher is all about the specialty ammos like Haywire, for example. I like this change. Some people seem to think that it's too powerful. I think it's probably going to come with a small increase to the battle value cost of running Narc, which is fair. And having run very effective SRM boats with INARC in a tournament, this is not game breaking and is probably a good change because Narc was so bad before that almost nobody took it, and now it's actually not just incidental and you can build a list around it. Getting a -1 target number modifier is very powerful. As a big fan of INARC previously, this will open up a lot more interesting missile lists, which is pretty good considering that we're buffing autocannons. And again, remember, improving AMS, so there is a counter to it. Mechs with AMS have a 50-50 chance of just shooting down your Narc pod when you fire it at them. So I think we'll probably see a lot more AMS if the meta shifts towards having Narcs. Now, physical weapons. These are not like punches and kicks. These are claws, lances, maces, etc. A lot lot of changes here. Big one is that the claws now have a target number modifier of 0. This is huge. They used to be +1. So certain mechs that have claws and TSM are now going to be punching the heads off of mechs very regularly. This is very scary. I do like melee in Battletech, and I think that buffing weapons is probably a good idea because kicks are really, really powerful. So even mechs that used to have melee weapons would often not use them. They would just kick things instead. Making weapons more appealing is a good change in my opinion. Lances now deal an extra 1 point of internal structure damage on a 9+. Pretty cool. This means that you can get some criticals on enemies with a lance. Lances are pretty uncommon. I don't think this is going to be a huge change, but it will make taking lances a lot more attractive as a weapon option. You might want to actually seek out some lance-wielding mechs because you can now also get that bonus when you charge. When you do a charge, the first location that you hit with the charge damage, you roll on a 5-up, and if you get that 5-up, you deal 1 point of internal damage. That's pretty good. So now you can deal some big damage with a charge, and at the same time do a little bit of internal damage to that section, and displace an enemy mech. So pretty risky, but like it could pay off, and I'm interested to know in the comments if you guys know of any mechs that have any of these equipment pieces that have all of these crazy changes on them that you think will be significantly better with this. Please leave a comment and a like and subscribe while you're down there. Maces used to be pretty much useless because they forced a PSR whenever you missed an attack, like a kick, but didn't have the bonus to hit that a kick does. So deleting the PSR requirement makes these a lot more viable. Maces are kind of the new kid on the block. They're still inaccurate, but they do 1 damage per 4 tons, and you don't just trip over yourself when you fail your attack with them. So I think that maces might actually be reasonably okay, especially if you can get like a cheap melee mech that has a mace and then increase its piloting to like 3 or even 2. That might be pretty good. Retractable blade now automatically has the piercing optional rule, and we remove the check that your retractable blade will break when you punch. So now retractable blades will not deal that much damage, but if I remember correctly, retractable blades allow you to punch as well, so you can pop out the retractable blade, punch twice. You don't get the -2 target number modifier, but you do get 2 punches, and if you have a retractable blade in each arm, which some mechs do, you can potentially get an AP, just like AP ammo, or the lance, and do some internal damage. So that's pretty nice, and now your blade doesn't snap off anymore, which is definitely nice. It makes it attractive to use as an extra way of getting internal damage. And again, that's another thing where that is stronger, but all of the things that used to remove that bonus are now being removed. So that's going to make this not just a little bit better, but a lot better. Finally, we have shields, which have overall been simplified and made, I would say, probably a lot better. Previously, shields would impose a penalty to hit if you had them in your arm with all of your arm-mounted weapons. And I can think of at least one Black Knight that is really going to love these changes, because that penalty is now no longer in effect. In addition, they have made things a little bit simpler. There used to be 3 different shield modes. Now it's just lowered, where you can use the arm freely and the shield will only protect the arm from damage, and raised, where the shield is going to protect the CT, left arm, left torso, and left leg of the mech from the front, and you can't make attacks with shielded limbs or weapons in the locations covered by the shield in that phase, or use any AMS mounted in these locations. So that's the same as before, but they've basically made shields easier to understand and also stronger, which is maybe not actually a great thing because shields were already very powerful if you knew how to use them. And also, some designs would have center torso mounted weapons. With the old rules, you could have the shield semi-raised where you were only protecting the arm and the side torso for that side. Now you can't do that. It's either just protecting the arm or protecting the whole side of the mech and stopping you from firing weapons out of those locations. And then pretty much everything else about shields is the same, except that shield bash has now been changed. It used to be an attack on its own. Now it just modifies punches. So again, this is a big buff to shields. +1 damage to punches for a small shield, +2 for medium, +3 for large. So you still get to make your 2 punch attacks, and then you just get bonus damage on top of what it would normally deal. And that's applied before damage multipliers. So there's a couple mechs out there with TSM and shields, which is going to make them a lot stronger overall. This is going to put a lot more mechs into head capping territory with punches that didn't have that option previously. And then there's another really big change to charges. 2 changes to charges with the lance and the shield, making charging a lot better if you have a shield, which is kind of great. I really love that fan fantasy of if you choose to build a mech with a lance and shield, you can charge like a knight and just absolutely crunch somebody, and then all of the damage that you take from charging, if the shield is raised, is assigned to the shield. So your arm is going to take a lot of hits from this, but all of those damage groupings are going to be reduced by your shield's damage absorption, which for a small shield is 3, and for a medium shield is 5. So if you have a medium shield and you charge while raising it, you take no damage to your mech. You only take damage to the shield itself. Its DC will be reduced. That is a seriously big buff for medium shields and even small shields. This is a lot of damage that you can reduce. Say you took 3 clusters of 5. Now you're taking, instead of 15 damage, only 6. Now, we already talked about AP ammo, but the other really big change for autocannons is that precision ammo is now 0.6 times instead of 0.5 times. So previously, AC-20s would only get 2 rounds of precision ammo per ton. Now they're going to get 3, which is a 50% increase in the amount of shots that you have. So everyone's beloved Hunchback 4G suddenly just got 50% more shots with its precision autocannon, which is a big deal. That makes precision toting mechs a lot more dangerous because you can't just ignore them and wait for them to run out of ammo anymore. You pretty much have to deal with them or else they're going to take big chunks out of you. And again, for AC-5s, now you have 12 rounds of ammunition instead of 10. That's gonna last pretty much all match. Precision AC-10 and AC-20 ammo has been limited significantly in tournaments already, so this is probably too powerful of a change for these mighty weapons to get, but I will gladly take a Saladin with precision ammo now and blow people's backs out with it. And the final change is missiles with acid ammo now get just as much ammo as normal, and the cluster hits are reduced from -2 to -1. So acid ammo used to not really be very good. It deals 3 damage instead of 2 on ferrofibrous armor, which granted is a very common type of armor to have, but because of the cluster hit penalty, pretty much nobody took them, because if you faced someone that wasn't using ferrofibrous armor, or if you faced someone that was using ferrofibrous armor, like, you would still only deal a little bit of extra damage to ferrofibrous, and you deal a lot less to non-ferrofibrous. So I guess this change is fine. I don't see it really having that huge of an impact. It will be pretty darn good against clans now, though. Let me know what you think about any of these changes in the comments. Please and thank you. Would love to hear from you. Remember to leave a like and to subscribe to the channel for more strategy game content. Thank you so much for watching, Mech Warriors, and have a great day.